Right now, over 150 ships are sitting anchored outside one of the most important waterways on Earth, going nowhere. Oil prices have surged nearly 10% in days, and energy analysts are using words like guaranteed global recession. This is not a hypothetical. This is happening. Today, we're breaking down the full economic shockwave of the Iran war, from oil markets to your grocery bill, with hard data, expert analysis, and a clear picture of who gets hurt the most. Before we talk money, you need to understand the geography, because without it, none of this makes sense. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow choke point, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, sitting between Iran and Oman. It connects the Persian Gulf to the open seas of the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. And through that 21-mile gap flows the main source of the world's energy. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in 2024, approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day transited the Strait of Hormuz. That's roughly 20% of all global petroleum consumption and more than 27% of all seaborne oil trade on the planet. But it's not just oil. The strait is also the main transportation route for 22% of the world's liquefied natural gas exports, mostly from Qatar, which is one of the largest LNG producers on Earth. And here's what makes it truly irreplaceable. There is no real alternative. Saudi Arabia has a pipeline that crosses the country from east to west, the East-West Pipeline. The UAE has a pipeline that bypasses the strait and exits at the Gulf of Oman. But combined, those pipelines can only handle about 17% of the typical flow volumes through Hormuz. In a sustained disruption, there is no plan B large enough to matter. The Strait of Hormuz is the valve of the global energy system. So what happened? On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran, targeting military facilities, nuclear sites, and senior leadership. The operation resulted in the death of Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Iran's response was swift and severe. Retaliatory missile and drone attacks hit Israeli cities and U.S. military bases across the Gulf in the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain. Iran-backed Hezbollah launched rockets into Lebanon, and then came the message that shook global markets to their core. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, began transmitting VHF radio warnings to vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. No ship is allowed to pass. Within hours, tanker traffic dropped by approximately 70%. Over 150 ships anchored outside the strait rather than risk being targeted. Within days, traffic had fallen to virtually zero. Qatar, one of the world's largest LNG providers, halted production after Iranian drone strikes hit its industrial facilities at Ras Laffan and Mesaid, and the world's energy markets started to price in the worst. Let's talk numbers, because the numbers are staggering. At the time of filming, analysts are warning that prices could hit $100 per barrel or higher if the disruption persists. To understand how serious that is, consider this. A sustained closure of Hormuz could remove anywhere from 8 to 10 million barrels of oil per day from global supply, even accounting for alternate routes. That's not a small disruption. That is a structural collapse in global energy supply. Robert McNally, a veteran oil market analyst, put it bluntly. A prolonged closure of the Strait of Hormuz is a guaranteed global recession. And the mechanism is not complicated. When oil is cut off, prices rise. When prices rise high enough, economies contract. Consumers spend more on fuel, less on everything else. Businesses face higher production and shipping costs. Airlines, manufacturers, logistics companies, they all get squeezed simultaneously. Ali Vaiz of the International Crisis Group described the dynamic this way. Closure of Hormuz would disrupt roughly a fifth of globally traded oil overnight, and prices wouldn't just spike, they would gap upward violently on fear alone. That's important, because oil markets don't just price in what's happening now, they price in what might happen next. And the inflation math? If crude hits $100 per barrel and stays there, economists at Capital Economics estimate it would add 0.6 to 0.7 percentage points to global inflation, on top of whatever inflation was already running in the system. Not everyone is equally exposed. Let's be specific. Asia is ground zero. In 2024, 84% of crude oil transiting the Strait of Hormuz was headed for Asian markets. 83% of LNG flowing through Hormuz was destined for Asia. China, India, Japan, and South Korea together accounted for 69% of all crude and condensate flows through the strait. Container ships carrying manufactured goods, raw materials, fertilizers, sugar, aluminum, and pharmaceuticals all pass through this choke point. It connects Gulf megaports like Jebel Ali in Dubai, one of the busiest ports on Earth, to global supply chains. Every major shipping company has already responded. Maersk, MSC Group, CMA CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, COSCO, and Emirates Sky Cargo have all restricted or halted bookings through the region. And there's a compounding problem. The Red Sea is also disrupted again. After the Yemen-based Houthi movement resumed attacks on Red Sea shipping following the Iran strikes, carriers who had slowly been returning to the Suez Canal route are pulling back. That means approximately 2.5 million TEUs of global container shipping capacity are being absorbed by the longer Cape of Good Hope route around southern Africa, adding 10 to 14 days to transit times and significant cost. With both Hormuz and the Red Sea under pressure simultaneously, global freight rates are expected to stay elevated through at least the first half of 2026. And then there's war risk insurance, one of the most underappreciated transmission mechanisms of this crisis. Tanker operators don't just need the strait to be technically open, they need insurance. As attacks on vessels accumulate and underwriters start paying out claims, war risk premiums rise across every hotspot on the planet. That cost gets passed down to shippers, then to businesses, then to consumers. Industries facing slowdowns include automotive manufacturing, consumer electronics, pharmaceuticals, and temperature-controlled food supply chains. This is not an oil story alone. This is a global supply chain story. Financial markets are already showing the classic symptoms of an oil shock combined with war risk. Investors are rotating into safe haven assets, gold, the Japanese yen, the Swiss franc. Equities in energy importing economies are under pressure. Bond markets are recalibrating inflation expectations. The Stimson Center, a respected policy research institution, summed up the macro problem clearly. A sustained Hormuz disruption would raise fuel and freight costs, worsen inflation expectations, tighten financial conditions, and weigh most heavily on import-dependent emerging markets. For emerging markets in Asia and Africa that are already running tight finances, higher oil means a double blow, weaker trade balances and currency pressure. If your currency weakens while your oil import bill rises in US dollars, you're caught in a devastating squeeze. Central banks in these countries face an impossible choice: raise rates to defend the currency and choke growth, or let inflation run. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is one lever available to policymakers. The U.S. has tapped it before and could again, but reserves are not unlimited, and they buy time, not a solution. Here's where the story gets broader and more personal. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just an energy corridor. The bottom line from financial analysts is this: the world did not enter this crisis from a position of weakness in demand. Global oil consumption was solid heading into 2026. That means even a partial disruption carries more weight than it would in a demand downturn. The question markets are now asking is not whether a disruption is happening. It clearly is.
The question is, how long does it last?